Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets split a back-to-back with the LA Clippers and Lakers, all in the same building. Is it good enough that they got the win against the better team while coming out a little flat, a little sluggish, and quite frankly, a little overmatched against the Lakers tonight? We break down both games coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner and operator of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job today for free on linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And Doug, it was a tale of two nights, one crypto center, but two very different performances for the Brooklyn Nets. Is it enough, as we'll talk about both of these games, is it enough, Doug, that they did beat the Clippers, even if they just lost to the Lakers?
Yeah, you come out of Saturday's game against the Clippers, which was a nice resounding win, and you feel like you're still sort of riding this Jock Vaughn high of how they've been playing.
He's
recently.
Intoxicating.
Oh yeah,
Jock is intoxicating.
You've seen the salt and pepper beard, my goodness. And then you think you're playing a LeBron-less Lakers, and that's going to kind of be maybe an easy rollover game. They've looked terrible. LeBron's not playing. I know that the Nets are down a bunch of guys in this game. No Kyrie, obviously, no Simmons, no Seth, lose Claxton part way through this. But still, you think it's like, hey, this Lakers team stinks, right? And so you feel like this is the perfect place for a back-to-back, which is never easy, especially a back-to-back in LA. When the early game ended early and you give it a few more hours out on the town. But is it good enough? No, only because the Lakers are not good. And this is a team, while they're not a tanking team because they clearly want to win, this has been one of the statistically worst teams in the whole NBA this season, and they're without their best player, and the Nets looked horrible. And so it's not good enough. No. And these are the games that the Nets, over the course of a long season, will remember it. Probably not, but this is a game that it hurts to lose this one because the Lakers, again, are a team that the Nets, with Kevin Durant and kind of anybody else, really should be winning.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the key players there, which, again, still no excuses need be made when you don't have LeBron James playing across from you, but no Seth Curry. And really, you bring up some of these names because how impactful they were the night before against the Clippers, obviously, on the front end of this one. But then to your point, I so badly want to look at the stat lines or go back in this game and say, well, if this or if that, there could have been a version of this game that you lose where you don't feel bad about it. But it's really hard to find it. And frankly, when you win, something that the Nets have been pretty good at here, when you play a team that is the worst in the NBA from beyond the arc, and then they go out and they knock down 40%, this is one of those ones where you feel like, oh, sure, this is the kind of game that this team is going to have on the back end of a back-to-back for us, right? So it's like some of those things happen there. And then you mentioned it too. The biggest factor in this one to me is Claxton going out there. Not that he was stopping Anthony Davis, but they're already thin. You lose that body. And this just felt like a smorgasbord for Davis underneath the basket.
Yeah, they just it was so much stumbling early. I want to get to Davis here in a second.
Yeah.
It highlights some of what's, the Nets' continued issues are around the interior. But this was a game where the Lakers one specifically, this felt like every bit like a back-to-back. It felt like a back-to-back to back-to-back. They were so it was like they were in cement. They were completely discombobulated on offense, a ton of mistakes. They still got a bunch of wide open looks from beyond the arc. They were shooting at one point, they were shooting like 11% from three, and they hit a barrage in the third quarter to sort of pull their way back into the game and give a sense that like maybe they could get back into it. But really, outside of that flurry of shots when they went on like the 16-2 run in the third, outside of that, the rest of the game was like a complete F. They looked bad on every aspect of the game. Like it looked. I mean, frankly, I'm not saying they just looked hungover. Like
Yeah.
it was very slow. There was a million mistakes. There were mental errors. There was a few little things that went against them, but most of it was self-inflicted. Most, bunnies at the rim, wide open threes, ill-timed turnovers, missing defensive assignments. Davis is killing them over and over and over again. And it just had this. Sometimes you take a schedule loss. You're going across the country. You're playing LA. It's a back-to-back. There are times where the schedule will just get you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just you're missing a bunch of guys, so you're having to throw minutes to just guys who haven't gotten tons of run, and they're really being asked a lot of them. And so a lot of things did really pile up for the Nets here. And like I said, and even with all that, I mean, this is like Wenyen Gabriel and Troy Brown Jr. and Russ, who, Russ tried desperately to get the Nets back into this game.
He likes Kevin. He's friends with him. He wants him to do well.
Westbrook put the Nets on his back for a little while here and almost got them back into it.
Yeah.
And that's where it's just like, these are just the ones when we're tallying up the wins and losses, these are the tough ones. Cause this is barely an NBA team, the Lakers. They really are. They're like sub replacement at almost every position except for Davis. And the Nets just looked, and that's just how bad the Nets look. Right?
Yeah,
they just simply couldn't get anything done.
Yeah, in first half of this one only, and we'll talk about specific players, but I mean, there's only 6 shots for Kevin Durant in the first half of this game. And to your point again, on a back-to-back like this, like against the bad team, this is where you want to come out, you want to bury them early.
This is where the schedule shouldn't be a schedule loss, because it's like that the Lakers just are just not good.
Well, and by the way, and this is where no excuses need to be made. You should win this game 99 out of 100 times in this version of the season with what's going on with the Lakers. But then when you look at that final quarter, and we know the Nets pull their starters there on the back end of it, last 2.5, 3 minutes of the game, but 36-26, right? You're outscored in the fourth quarter by 10 points. It was a losing effort, but you came back in the third +6 to get yourself back into it. When you look at the last quarter, to me, that's where like you look at it, you go, right, that's the fatigue factor. Like that's the legs getting away from you a little bit, where and again, you're not getting those shots to fall throughout it. You're missing key pieces inside of it. I'm fine. Again, they won 4 out of their previous 5. Yeah. It is what it is. And you have 2 more games on the West Coast that include the Kings and then include the Portland Trailblazers. So this can all go really well for you in the totality. However, in this moment, when you come out of a game against this Lakers team, you just feel like, yeah, you knew Anthony Davis was going to feast, but name another guy that's going to be a problem. It turns out only he needed to be the main problem, and that was more than enough to beat Brooklyn today.
Yeah, they just didn't have enough firepower too. Like the offense became a problem for the Nets. Like you said, the legs didn't seem like they were there, and sometimes that can be where you're just down too many guys. I mean, for as rough as Simmons has looked at times, it's still usually better to have him. They desperately could have used him, especially on the interior, because when they just, they're not going to play Daron Sharp, it appears now. And if that's going to be the case, they were going with Yuta Watanabe and Markieff Morris at the 5 and Kevin Durant at the 5. And that's going to be a problem. And like, that's where a guy like Simmons would have helped when they can't hit a shot, when they can't get any shot creation, when they can't make anything from beyond the arc. That's where, I mean, obviously Kyrie or Seth Curry would have helped. Right. So when you're going to continue to churn off players because of rest or injury or nonsense or whatever, like that will eventually catch up with you.
And just this one last note here, because we'll come back in. I want a little question that I'll pose to you around what they chose to do tonight. Jacques Vaughn, from a rotation standpoint, as thin as they were. But remember, Seth Curry, it's not an injury. This is just managing him coming back. And that's, again, does further take you down this road of like scheduled loss potentially here for Brooklyn. The only little caveat I'll make is, if it's going to be scheduled, then why do the 38 minutes on Kevin Durant, right? Like if we're going to schedule it, why don't we make a different choice? And that's what I want to talk about here, as well as reflecting on that Clippers game coming up next.
All right, before we get into that, we're going to talk to you about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. Sometimes you maybe feel like you just need to go out and hire another basketball player or two. Like maybe you just need one more 7-footer on the roster that can guard the interior, or one more sniper from beyond the arc. LinkedIn is the kind of business that's going to be able to help you hire the candidates you need faster. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster. And here's the word you're going to like: for free. All you do is you add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile. You spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions that make it super easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and eventually hire, because that's the point. LinkedIn wants to help you get that hire down. It's the number one way to help your business. And LinkedIn Jobs is number one in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And of course, my friends, you have made the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day. Why don't you make that second listen Locked On Sports today? From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only the Locked On Network can provide you. Locked On Sports today. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. So, Doug, the one thing I want to touch on there, specifically with the Lakers game, the Kevin Durant piece of it is an issue in some senses. We've talked about this before. You can change coaches. You're not going to change Kevin Durant's mentality of wanting to play every game possible. However, the one thing that, like, going back and looking at the box score, there's a couple of guys I specifically like. A game like this, I'm not going to put a guy like Watanabe is coming back off the ankle necessarily. But Markieff Morris plays 20 minutes in this game. Cam Thomas, I'll go specifically on Cam Thomas, only plays 23 minutes in this game, and he only played 20 the night before. So the one area that I can push back on is like, hey, maybe this is going to end up being a scheduled loss for Brooklyn. Okay, that's fine. But then the way that you at least try to manufacture success, or at least manufacture value, is to lean into a couple of guys that should have some legs underneath them, especially younger players, and say, hey, let's give you a little bit of run here. I'm not here advocating that Day'Ron Sharpe is out of the rotation unjustifiably, but I can make a case that why not have him go out there and bang around with Anthony Davis? Take all 6 fouls over 12 minutes. I don't care what it looks like, but why not utilize everybody you have at your disposal?
Yeah, I knew this was going to be a problem when KD went outside of his rotation, started the fourth quarter, because they had just gone on that run to pull them back into the game.
Yep.
And that's just always a recipe for he's going to play max minutes, right? Like, that's just because coaches can't help themselves. I understand it. I'm not even blaming them. The reason you have rotations kind of set in stone to start is to kind of save coaches and players from themselves, right? This is why guys rest on back-to-back sometimes too. It's because it's saving the competitive fire on, and just, patience is the better part of valor
the game
here.
down.
Yeah, like, it's just because you just want to do it. Like, Kevin Durant would vote to play 48 minutes every single game if it was up to him. The coaches probably would too, because it's self-preservation. It's gonna help you win more games if guys like Kevin Durant play the fourth quarter, or play full max minutes. So when he starts the fourth quarter, you kind of just know what's going to happen, right? It's like, if it stays close at all, he's going to play. Now, when it's over and he's still playing, it's a little bit weird, right? Like, even when we're all sort of wondering out loud why this is happening. But,
and it looks even worse too when the last few possessions that Durant is out there, he has the ball in his hands, and you can tell he's gassed. He's trying to get towards the rim. He's getting swallowed up. Like, everyone's ready to get out of this game. You're like, then why bother? Why bother being there?
And at that point, you have to, I was with you. I was a little surprised that Cam's minutes, I think he played 19 in this one. Cam's minutes
and
are
25
19.
the game prior. Excuse me, I was off on that. Yeah,
because his minutes looked a little weird because he was at 19, but he was in the first rotation in the first quarter. Like, he was part of that first group. So you're like, oh, okay, that's a little weird that he didn't play. You mentioned Day'Ron. At some point, you just have to concede the idea that they're getting sort of eaten alive on the interior. I think a lot of that, frankly, was just energy, right? Like, they've not had an overwhelmingly difficult time rebounding of late. And it's not like the Lakers are some huge front. Yes, AD is very good and he's big, but that's one guy, and they've dealt with other bigs here. I do think some of that is an energy piece, right? At some point, you just lose a half a step on a box out. You lose a half a step on a jump. You just lose some of these, and then you just lose a half a step here and a half a step there, and you're just getting untimely rebounded sort of away from you. So yes, I'm with you. I think this is a part where we probably should have seen a few of these guys for a few more minutes and conceded the idea that, and it might not work out, but you have to just try and play them a few more minutes. And so And look, I think we thought this during the game too. This isn't a results oriented take here. Like we're talking about it and saying it's weird that we're not seeing some of these guys or we're not seeing them for a few more minutes here. And especially with the guys like Simmons and Curry and whatnot that are out and it's still not happening. I don't know. So I think a bunch of different factors collided here. And I think the Nets probably were gassed. And I also don't think they did themselves any favors.
Yeah, because you go and you look at even Royce O'Neal played 35 minutes the night before. He comes back. Joe Harris obviously coming back over 30 minutes. So that's all. I mean, listen, it's a footnote of this. And by the way, neither Doug nor I are suggesting that, hey, if you had gone with Cam Thomas and Day'Ron Sharpe, you could have won this thing. But it's just
correct. That's not the suggestion. It's not. It's just that it's weird that it didn't happen.
And to me, in game, especially in games like that. Now, again, they lose the game, so you can reflect back on it a little bit differently. But in the nature of back-to-backs, and again, we talked about the top, because they beat the Clippers, does it make it easier to try to hold back against the Lakers? Or does it spur you on to think, hey, the Lakers are bad, we can get back-to-back wins here? But you end up you do two things. You steal some rest for some of your starters, like Kevin Durant, like Royce O'Neal. You know you're going to get some of these other guys back in the rotations like Curry. But then the other byproduct is like you just get valuable minutes for guys, like extra minutes for Cam Thomas to figure things out. Even if it's nothing for Day'Ron Sharpe, hey, all right, like get out. By the way, Kessler Edwards, he's on the bench. Like, I'm not here telling you that he's any more deserving of minutes in the long term, but in this game, why not? He's been doing nothing for weeks. Like, he should be fresh as a daisy. Run him out there. He can give you some defensive length. Maybe he can knock down some of those outside looks that you need on the offensive end. So, sometimes I know I overextend the idea of throw some things at the wall and see what sticks. But as this game was progressing along, it felt like the usual method here since Jacques Vaughn took over is not going to be the recipe for success. Why not do something different?
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I messed up here, but you were right with Cam Thomas, 23 minutes. I refreshed this provider and I got the actual correct number. Okay. So my bad, it was 23 minutes on Cam Thomas and still feels like
30. Like give me 30 minutes from Cam Thomas. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, a little low, a little on the low side. Look, and sometimes too, this isn't even an excuse, but this is from time to time can happen for an NBA team. You can, and it's going to happen more if you're tired. You can just run bad from beyond the arc or places like this that are going to compound the inability to win, right? Like if you're already, and maybe it's because you're tired that it's not happening, but if you're going to shoot 25% from three, you're not going to win any games, right? Like it's just not going to happen. Or you'll pull one out here or there. And it was only through a flurry of threes in the third that even got them to this 26% number, which they were at, because again, it was horrible. They were 3 for 16, I think, at one point, or maybe even
they were 1 for 13 at one point.
Yeah, right. It was horrible. And if you're just going to shoot that poorly, the other team does not have to do much, right? Like it's just going to shoot. Even a poor shooting team like the Lakers, it aren't going to need to do much if they're going to get some things going on the interior and hit just a regular amount of threes, which is basically what the Lakers did. And you're just going to be too hamstrung at that point. You can't miss that many shots. And even with no Seth and not Simmons, obviously, and even with no Curry, their looks were still good in this game. They just did not go down. They just could not buy a basket, even when I don't think this was a ball movement issue. I don't think this was a, stagnation issue. I think you thought the same thing, right? I think stylistically, they looked very similar to how they played during this run that's been very good. Yep. Like, Durant getting out of doubles really easily, trying to find the next shooter, making the extra pass. That was all still happening. Just at least early on, at the end of these sequences, the shots weren't falling.
And that's why I think here, the last thing we want to close out on, which will tie back into the Clippers game, is what were things that looked good early on in this one that didn't sustain for various reasons, and frankly, were things that we saw work against the Clippers and worked the game before and the game before. It's why they've been winning more often than not, and why, again, you can't win every single game, so maybe it's okay to just take this one and move past it.
All right, before we get to that too, wanted to also just real quick talk about the Anthony Davis's impact on the Nets here, but got to talk to our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. BetOnline has you completely covered for all your NBA information, obviously NFL as well, as they roll through those two seasons. even if you want to get into soccer, esports, with the World Cup not too far around the corner, betonline.net is going to have you covered for every possible situation you could think of when it comes to betting. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those on BetOnline as well. The fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix, head on over to the website today. Use that mobile device. Learn a little bit more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And of course, where we start to wrap things up, tying a bow on these back-to-back games, still a little bit of this West Coast swing for the Brooklyn Nets. And if you are live in over on YouTube, we of course greatly appreciate it as we do our post games live. We will not be doing our extended version tonight, but it's always fun to see everybody in there, and we always appreciate that. Quickly on Anthony Davis, because you mentioned it here, we do want to close out, I think, on positives overall, but the Anthony Davis, which we talked about at the top too, when we got to watch this game together, where I was saying, it's like, boy, I mean, talk about a guy that just cannot be healthy enough to be the kind of player that you always want him to be. And then he has a game like you would expect him to have if he was as healthy as he could be. To your point, man, I thought same type of methodology, the help defense, the extra player coming over, but just really a lot of it, and you heard this on the broadcast too, positioning. Like, it just felt like the Nets were a half a step late getting to the spot. And while Anthony Davis is still going to get his numbers, it very much felt like, 15% of those should have been challenged a little bit sooner. Yeah. Maybe should have put him at the line, make him earn it a little bit more. The Nets just could not get anything actively going against him.
It's almost like they were surprised when he's rolling to the rim. It's like, what do you think he's going to do? It was like caught off guard by him rolling to the rim.
What's the scouting report of this guy?
Off of just like some very easy like pick and roll stuff, and like Russ getting downhill. Sometimes it was just kind of over the top stuff, like they fronted him weird, and he was just able to catch a pass going behind. And their
switching on those sequences were really brutal, where the handoff was that extra half a step leading towards the basket that gave Davis clean access.
Yeah, like right. So someone's supposed to come tag that, and like they don't come for help, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, hey, was anyone going to come over here for some weak side help to cover easily the best guy on the other team that's just destroying us over and over again? So I don't know if that's coaching. I don't think it is. I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it's just like, again, being discombobulated. They were completely outsized by how they ran the rotations because, again, Sharp didn't play, whatever. But after Claxton, they don't have anybody. Right, it's Yuta Watanabe, it's Markieff Morris trying to front him. That's always going to be a problem with a guy like him because there's not big enough. These guys are just not big enough. So if you're going, unless you're going to be, and they did double him a decent amount, but unless you're going to be fully sold out into doing it, which I don't think they were, if you make some mistakes also, it's just going to be a problem. So we don't need to harp on it. I know people are going to want to say this is indicative of the Nets not having enough size. A reminder, we have not been going nuts about this lately because they've been doing okay with what they have. They ran into just the wrong guy here on the wrong night, and they didn't do themselves any favors. And when you are a little bit undersized, a guy like Anthony Davis is going to really wreak havoc on you.
Yeah, and it's tricky too, I think, because you want to dedicate to your point. They put double teams out and they try different things, but against a team that has not been good shooting anywhere almost on the floor, including from the outside, then I think you get into a bit of a trap there, right? Where now all of a sudden they're knocking down some of their perimeter looks and you feel compelled. You got to get out to rotate. You got to close out on those. And then it's that give and take. Now all of a sudden Davis has the even easier access, etc. You mentioned Claxton there, who gets hit in the face, loses a contact. He ends up coming back in, then goes back out and finishes his night. Now, again, it's not as if he was shutting down Anthony Davis, but it just illustrates your point further. You're not going to anybody else after that. And I think that diminished whatever version you were going to have. positively that carries over from these past couple of games that we were talking about too, though, just to turn the page on Claxton, was his connection with Kevin Durant. Has looked as good and as developing as we've seen over these last couple of seasons. And it's interesting to see how Nicholas Claxton, the evolution of his game, is directly benefiting the best player on the team in Kevin Durant, because you have a guy that can run with you. He can fill the lane. He's finishing at the rim. Prior to this, the gather, the double clutch, all those things were hindering, I think, that level on the offensive end. And you're seeing that trust there now with KD.
Yeah, Durant has assisted on the most Claxton points this season. I think it's like not even close, and that's not all that huge of a surprise. They've developed a nice little two-man game. Did not come to fruition really in this one, but again, some of that was because Claxton just was out of the game. I did think that going back to the Clipper game, which we ended up not talking too much. I mean, this podcast would have been totally different had we done it Saturday night as opposed to Sunday night, because Saturday, they just looked awesome against the Clippers, right? A dominating win. So much was going right. Obviously, Curry is a flamethrower. Claxton had so many nice moments in that game where we saw just a continued growth in what he's doing, fronting guys off the dribble and taking guys strong to the rim with his right hand. Did that multiple times in the game, right? Like that's just a relatively new piece of his game. We were worried about this guy's hands at times and decision making, and to have sort of the confidence to say, "Oh, you're going to open up the space in the lane and dropped all the way down. I'm just going to take it at you here." You know, right? Like if
you and I, no, I apologize. You and I just did the episode talking about why he should be, in consideration, or why the Nets fans should just be excited that he could be one of the most improved players in the league, even without any accolades attached to it. But in this game tonight, you saw the same thing as well. That little push shot in the lane, right? Yeah. Like you and I are talking about, if he can just feather that in, and it's like we're starting to see the next little phase maybe of his game that we may not see kind of full fruition until next year, but that keeps building off of it. And you mentioned it, man. That game on Saturday night against the Clippers had me as buzzing as we've been over this run, because some of the other games, the Wizards and the Hornets, you don't get too excited about who you're playing against. The Clippers are legit, and they're legit from a defensive perspective, and that's been the big difference too. With Curry out there in that game, again, to tie it into this one against the Lakers, it's how do you mitigate how good Anthony Davis is on the offensive end and on the interior? Be knocking down your perimeter shots on the other end of the floor, make them be chasing you, make them have to go to perimeter looks. And then all of a sudden it feels like a different kind of flow, just like that Clippers game. And defensively, things were a lot crisper defensively against the Clippers on Saturday night, as opposed to this one, which I think plays a big factor too. Everyone's been talking about it, holding opponents to under 100 points, right? Like, you could see everything that's been working so well, and you can see every way in which it just came up short against the Lakers.
Yeah, like, and again, it's going to happen at times, and I think it was nice for the Nets to have buffered a few W's here, right? In this most recent run, that this one doesn't feel, because a loss to the Lakers like this at a different point in the season, a la like 2 weeks ago, would have felt very much like a sky is falling moment, right? It was, we're coming off a situation where it was very hard to like hold on to anything with this Nets team that was positive. We are not very far removed from this feeling, right? Of just being like, what's good about what's happening here? Right? Like it was really hard. It was really hard. And that was not long ago. Things change very quickly. This most recent run has given, I think, fans and the base here a feeling that, okay, this loss is bad, but we can at least draw stylistically on what's been happening here in this most recent run since, really, if we're just going to put it this way, since Nash was fired and since Kyrie was suspended. Like the team looks different. Now, they were gifted a part of the schedule of teams that were much worse than they played in the beginning of the season. That definitely plays a part. But they're clearly playing differently here without those guys. And whether that's something that can continue to go on with Kyrie, I think we both believe it can. We'll see going forward if and when he comes back. But I think if this loss specifically to the Lakers had happened 2 weeks ago, this would have been a really bad podcast. Like this would have been a very, very down feeling of like what is going on. But we've seen that they are leaning on a style of play that's clearly working for them and is repeatable and will be able to hang, I think, with good teams once, and especially once they're healthy. And I think that's the part where if you're looking for positives, it's really just about the stuff that's happened leading up to this game.
Yes.
So that a loss to the 2-7 Lakers or whatever they were before this one. Oh yeah, they were 2-9. Oh my goodness, it's even more. 2-9, 2-9 Lakers.
That's got a whole lot worse.
Yeah, 2-9 Lakers that had like the worst point differential in the league would have just it would have hit differently 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and you know what? Something I'll just cap this off with, and it's Kevin Durant centric actually. In looking over the tale of 2 months here, October into November, and obviously in November, this is a team that's 4-3 over their first 7 games of the month. A lot of them have been without Kyrie Irving and a hodgepodge of some players. But I find it interesting that Kevin Durant took almost 21 shot attempts in October over those first handful of games. He's averaging 18.5 now, but over these last 3, 16, 16, 19. I mean, 16 shot attempts in a game against the Clippers that you win and you hold them to underneath 100. He's taking 1 less 3-point attempt per game as well over the October into November. Like, you talk about just doing things well. the fact that you can have Kevin Durant without Kyrie Irving, without Ben Simmons, whatever he's going to be, leading this team to a 4-3 record, mostly wins, mostly good games and good performances, while not having to do as much on the offensive end, like that matters too. And they got away from it late in this one. They kind of leaned into a couple possessions with him and it didn't work out. But building blocks, hey, if you can't win games, I'll put it this way. If you can't win games without Kevin Durant and potentially Kyrie Irving having to take 40 to 50 shots per game consistently, I think ultimately you're meant to fail. Like in the big picture, you need to have a full team around them. And you saw tonight, when it's not all there, it's going to be difficult. But by and large, this has been a good sample size for this team to carry forward.
Yeah, and I think those shot attempts decreasing are by design. We're seeing them play a different style. It's like we're going to lean into this idea that if you feel like you're going to double Kevin Durant, we're going to make you pay for that. Like that's definitely what's happening here. It's like if you're going to double, that's fine, but you are going to there's going to be many times where you're going to pay the price for that on, weak side threes and stuff like that and ball movement and this other stuff or getting back cut and these things that they've been able to put together basically since Jacques Vaughn took over as coach. And I think that is something that we're going to, I think we're going to continue to see that style of play over this West Coast trip and more. And tomorrow, usually we stick around for live. We're not going to do that tonight over on YouTube, but I do want to say that tomorrow we are going to talk more specifically about Kyrie. And, he's coming around the point where the initial sort of suspension would have come off. He's not going to join them for this West Coast trip, but I think we do want to talk about what it looks like for Kyrie were he to come back. And I think it's starting to trend like he will, but without it being official, but what it would mean for the team. And like, are there things that we can take away from what this team has done in the short term that Kyrie that would clearly benefit from getting Kyrie back, or are there parts that would not benefit from getting Kyrie back? And so that's definitely something that we're going to talk about tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, where we're going to do live after every single game. Steaming toward 4,000 subscribers now, so be part of that movement. Go subscribe over on Locked On Nets YouTube.
Only the wrong words are a waste of time. The right words can make a more lasting impression than 1,000 of Porthos's kisses. Why, that's Aramis from the Disney version of the Three Musketeers.
You had me at Disney, because otherwise, I mean, who cares if it's not Disney, right? Like a bunch of names. Who could be anybody, but I hear Disney. Oh, you got me running. Okay, we one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.